Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessica Greco from EBSCO, and I wanted to thank you for attending our WebEx series featuring Kara Penn. We have a really engaging session planned for you today, and before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to review with you to ensure a smooth session. First, the session is now being recorded. A link to the recording will be available for you a few days after the webinar and will be shared with you via email. Second, all of your lines are now muted to avoid any sound feedback or interruptions. If you are having technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to communicate and we will try to resolve. We thank you in advance for keeping your line muted during the session. Third, there will be a chance for any questions you have for Kara following her presentation. If you do have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat box at any time during her presentation to me directly. Finally, stay on the line once the webinar is finished, as you will be able to access a free session takeaway. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's featured presenter. Kara Penn is co-author of the book, Fail Better, Design Smart Mistakes and Succeed Sooner, published by Harvard Business Review Press, 2014. She's the owner and principal consultant at Mission Spark, where she works on the front lines of practical management to implement innovative strategy solutions in complex, often resource-constrained settings. Kara leverages more than 15 years of experience in senior leadership positions with organizations throughout the United States, including founder, director, chair, and board member. She has led award-winning community collaboratives, designed, managed, and evaluated multi-year social change initiatives, and provided in-depth consulting services to more than 75 NGOs, social enterprises, corporations, government programs, and philanthropic foundations. Several prestigious national fellowships, including Coro, Watson, and Forte, have recognized her leadership. Kara earned her MPP from the University of Chicago and her MBA from MIT and Sloan School of Management. You can learn more about Kara at www.failbetternow.com. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kara Penn.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to see so many of you joining today. Thank you to ESCO Learning for hosting and providing a platform to talk about something that's often very challenging for us to wrestle with, failure. My goal for all of you and for myself is to make sure that you really leave with actionable insights, things that you can put to work today, right after this webinar is over. So that's why the standard that I'm holding myself to, and I really invite your questions and feedback throughout this process. So thank you for spending a portion of your day to explore this topic, because so many of us spend a great deal of time and effort trying to avoid it. So I'd like to congratulate you for showing up in the first place, because we're going to muck around with failure a bit. The premise we start with and must accept, and probably you're here because you've already accepted this, failure will happen. It will happen. It probably has happened. It's happened for us individually, for our teams, for our organizations. So it's really about what you do with it, what you take from it that matters. And with Fail Better, we take it a step further. We know that failure is a powerful teacher and motivator. So how can we actually craft our work to be open to failure, to actually plan for failures so that they count and provide the benefits? For purposes of today, I think we should all keep in mind a broad view of failure. There are obvious failures, the big public company flops, where something goes horribly wrong and everybody's watching and everybody's criticizing and pundits are weighing in. But most of us, that's not our experience. Most of us are experiencing smaller mistakes that are easily covered and are tucked away so that we never really have to bring them out to the glaring light of day. I would also like to challenge us to think about staying safe and failing to change as also existing as a form of failure. By not evolving, by not taking risk, what opportunities are we missing? So let's jump in. Trying to shift the slides here. Okay, got it. So I just wanted to start with a little bit about the premise of the book and a little bit about the work that I do as my co-author, just as grounding, so you understand a little bit about where we're coming from. I think we can all agree that to innovate and to respond to uncertainty takes risk. There will be no innovation without risk. And with taking risk, there's the possibility of falling short. But most of us in most company cultures that we exist in frown upon failing. This leads us to inherently be risk averse. But the logic follows and the research follows that an environment hostile towards failure is an environment that is hostile towards innovation. So my co-author and I wrote Fail Better to fill a critical gap on the bookshelf. Part of that gap is that in corporate lore, we hear about leaders who failed their way to success. Endless stories, and we'll talk about a few of them, of how they were resilient and persevered to essentially be ultimately successful. And more, failure is the new black. We hear about its virtues, lots of people are publishing around it, blogs are dedicated to it. There's just our book, there's just a lot of things out there that suggest that there are benefits. We hear about the virtues. And we've all done it. We've all failed in some way. But learning and improving is notoriously hard to do. So assuming that to fail means that we will learn is a faulty assumption. The research proves time and time again that failure's benefits are far from automatic. Most of us rush on to the next project, we push it aside, or we blame other sources to indicate how failure was unavailable or unavoidable in the situations that we were facing. So ultimately, Fail Better engages us around failure is guaranteed and at some level desirable. How we can plan for and harness its benefits through a flexible method. So our goal is to actually show people how they can design their work to take advantage. And this is built on excellent research around adult learning, drawing from psychology, drawing from business practice. And then how we apply that method to our day-to-day work, because ultimately all of us still need to get our work done. We support that with developing and cultivating the mindset and skills. So essentially, everyone will fail some way, somehow. Failure is not necessarily bad. Not all failures are useful. How do we distinguish between them? How do we use a method to help us benefit from productive failures? And for me, the best part, which I think is a very empowering part of this, how can you start right away, even if you're in an environment that is hostile to you taking risk? That's very empowering to know that you can take steps right away that can assist with that. So my co-author, I just wanted to briefly say something about her, Anjali Sastry. She's faculty at MIT Sloan School of Management. We started working together first when I was a student there, an MBA student, and she and I have cultivated a 10-year partnership really fueled by a drive to understand what makes some leaders, managers, and teams perform at a higher level, and also ultimately why so many projects fall short. The data is notoriously hard to come by. We spent a lot of time looking for the data. You know, it's hard to come by good data about how often products, and teams and companies fail. The measurement methods tend to be inconsistent and the data difficult to find. But in 2013, the Project Management Institute reported that 17% of projects failed completely. So the odds are pretty good that one might completely fail in a very expensive project. And part of an astounding 2/3 of projects that the Institute said fall short of expectations, where we start with outcomes in mind and we actually don't reach them. That's the vast majority of projects we undertake. A 2012 study of 5,400 projects found that half of all large IT projects came in well over budget, with 1 in 6 overrunning costs so badly that they threatened to put the firm out of business. And change management programs are notorious for failing 2/3 of the time. So again, the odds are kind of stacked, you know, towards us for failing in major endeavors that we undertake. And Anjali and I have worked with hundreds of teams, I myself with over 75 organizations, about thinking about how do we really tease out what makes people effective in the work that they're doing. So the goals of what we'll talk about today: failure, the reality, and how we waste it, and the opportunities of learning; How do we stay at the frontier of failure, not at the back end of bad failures? How do we actually achieve and build in room for mistakes and crafting those with experimentation in mind? How do we cultivate the skills and mindset, and what are those skills that we're looking for? And then ultimately, what are we building in terms of a culture? Are we building a culture of failure when we take that, when we go down this path? Or are we building something different, something more innovative that looks at affordable risk? So I really want to start with a little visualization, because I think this is a powerful place from which we can change. I really want each person that's out there, I know there's, for each of you out there, to take a moment to recall or bring up a moment where you feel that you personally failed or professionally failed. So if you can think about something and just bring it up viscerally. Chances are it brings up a strong reaction. Failing in a professional or personal domain is a bit like touching a hot stove. We retain a vivid lesson, and that lesson is don't do it, don't ever do it, take great precautions to avoid it or be penalized. We're hardwired to not want to be vulnerable in that way. And I'm asking that you resist that urge and go further. Expect to fail again. Expect to want to fail again. And what if we can change our mindset to embrace risk-taking at a level we can afford to extract the learning and ultimately to keep getting better? We know in our very complex world that failure is somewhat inevitable, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily something where we should just write it off and say, well, there's nothing that we could do, there's nothing that we could craft or a way of approaching all the different variables that might influence the economic factors that individuals within the organization, things that were well beyond my control. That may all be very true, and we know that system complexity exists. These things are all true, and yet we must endeavor forth. We must make attempts to innovate and change. So we accept that there's system complexity. So we need a method that's flexible that allows us to interact with that system complexity without betting the farm. So that's one critical piece to think about. The second piece I've already touched on, which is company culture and how much that can beat us back and keep us from taking risk or moving forward. We might be outright given restrictions and constrictions about what we can do and can't do. So how do we fight against that? And then our own bodies fight against us, our own mind fight against us from wanting to experience setbacks. We want to avoid them, we want to be successful. So building from that, it's important to think about, why famous failures don't take us there. They're inspiring, they're interesting, and they bring with them a lesson to just keep going. But fundamentally, this isn't that useful, right? How many of us are Michael Jordan, Steve Jobs, Oprah Winfrey? Every one of these individuals was more than a sum of try again. Each had a strategy. Each had a set of skills for capitalizing on setbacks and the ability to keep going. So we need to move beyond that. We need to move beyond that to cultivate it in ourselves. And I pulled up this cover of Harvard Business Review. In 2011, they really embraced that with the failure issue, how to understand it, how to learn from it, how to recover from it. And we take it a step further, how to plan and craft it as part of this. So the only real value of failure is you learning from it, and it's remarkably hard to do if left to our own devices. So really, good versus bad failure exists on a spectrum of failures. And I like to point to the wonderful work of Harvard business professor Amy Edmondson for thinking about this. When we think about predictable kind of operational level failures where the uncertainty is low and the types of failures are very predictable, to more complex systems where, they may be unavoidable failures and there's a certain level of uncertainty. but also to the frontier of failure, as she likes to call it. You know, the place where we're in a space of high intelligence, we're innovating at the frontier. So what's blameworthy? Because we're not about building a culture of failure. So what's blameworthy? Lack of effort by a team member or your team is blameworthy. Deviating from known practices that are known to be successful or secure the safety of folks. Those are blameworthy failures. Failures in oversight, failures in overworking people, and having projects be under-resourced. Unintentional risk-taking. I deal with this all the time with many of the organizations I work with. They are living in such a risky setting by not having any reserves, as the case may be, or not thinking through the risks that they're taking, that ultimately they're betting the farm. They're putting their whole organization at risk, and they're not doing it intentionally. These are blameworthy failures. Those that are predictable and preventable and connect to human speak, I mean, these are just kind of dumb, you know. Fundamentally, these are kind of dumb failures. So what are the good failures? You know, the good failures that we want to encourage as part of it. We want those failures where we have opportunity to experiment, to test an idea or an approach, to explore based on the best data possible in an uncertain world, to confirm an idea that we have or to disconfirm, you know, to realize that it's not feasible and to pivot away from that. We're here to support good failures. So my efforts here and the intent of the book is to make sure that the right kind of failure instructs, refines, and improves ideas. So this is really what the book promises and what we're trying to deliver on. We want to help you support or generate small, smart mistakes that enable your team to meet its work requirements while building capacity, practices, and insight. This really involves learning at 3 levels. Which is great. And the personal domain is where you have the most control and can guarantee the benefits of failure no matter what happens, because this is you controlling your response and how you use it. But most of us have an influence beyond ourselves in organizational settings. So we might be managing a team, we might be a C-level individual who's managing many people within an organization, and so our influence goes further. And so what is it at the team level in terms of practices and habits that can be taken away from these experiences and that we can build on and change for future projects? And then ultimately, even in an organization that is risk adverse, there's an opportunity, whether during the project or when the project ends, to really syndicate the results and make sure that other teams or others within the organization can benefit from the insight of these efforts, which does not happen. I can tell you time and time again, this is where teams, organizations go short. They invest all of these resources and projects throughout their organization, and they fail to then share that information so other teams can learn and benefit. This is an image from the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. And I want to evoke the U.S. Civil Rights Movement here, because if we're going to live, you know, in the world of our own work for applying this model, I want to take an example that is actually really complex, where there was a lot at risk, high risk, nothing to lose, immense uncertainty and system complexity, lots of places to point fingers and to point blame in the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. But I also want to point to it as a project of sorts, right? It's a lofty project. It's a project beyond the scope of most of our imagination and experiences. Or maybe we would have a touch point with it, but the idea of leading or being a key leader in something like this is beyond what most of us can consider. But if we're going to live in the world of our own work and think about that, think about what's possible. And in this case, we'll be able to see, you know, that this was a project undertaken by many, that it was driven by strategy, by planning, and building a team, and a team that was spread out throughout the country. It was about making the most of the resources and opportunities at hand in very strategic ways. It was also about using data and results throughout the movement, throughout key efforts to pivot and change course. And ultimately, there was immense effort made to share the results of what worked and what didn't in real time. But it wasn't just about real time. We've come to, over generations, continue to explore and embed learning, and other movements have been able to learn and build on it, just like the civil rights movement built from others. And there's a human story here, too, of civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. going forth despite setbacks, a lesson in mindset and resilience. And I just want to share a little snippet from the book that captures this, because we use this as an example of this whole thing, and it's an example of a mistake. It's an example of a failure in the civil rights movement and how they used it. In late 1961, King and his colleagues embarked on a 9-month effort to tackle discrimination in Albany, Georgia. Despite their concerted efforts, the Albany campaign fell short of success, but it yielded important lessons that, according to King, immediately shifted the movement's approach. And a quote from him: "The mistake I made there was to protest against segregation generally rather than a single and distinct facet of it. Our protests were so vague that we got nothing, and the people were left very depressed and in despair. It would have been much better to have concentrated upon integrating the buses or the lunch counters. One victory of this kind would have been symbolic, would have galvanized support and boosted morale. What we learned from our mistakes in Albany helped our later campaigns in other cities to be more effective. We never since scattered our efforts in a general attack on segregation, but focused upon specific symbolic objectives." So they used this situation, a major situation, 9 months, people left feeling in despair, to actually pivot and change and inform and take advantage of visual symbolic efforts that were posted on TV and in the news, and just brought a conscious to people. So I want to build on that and think about civil rights movement as projects. What about our own projects? So how do we think about this in context of our own and think about this in terms of the method? I think it's most effective to think of a project you are currently working on right now or have recently finished, that you worked on with a team or that you had to work on with others, adding a layer of complexity. So take a moment to just think about a project that we can kind of walk through some of these steps of the method with, so that you can think about how it would apply to a real setting. In my case, I'm currently working on a project that feels that it has really large implications. I'm working with a large urban school district, and I'm working with the teachers union that interacts with that school district. And we're working around a pay-for-performance model, which historically has been a new direction for education to take. And that pay-for-performance system has been in place now for almost 10 years. And it's hard to pivot, and it's hard to iterate, and we're undertaking a major effort to look at and use the data to determine what's our next step around this pay-for-performance system. So it's very real for me in how I apply this approach to my own work and my own projects. So really, you'll see at the heart of the method, that there's an iterative center to this. This is not rocket science, and there are lots of other methods that support this, lean startup, agile software development. It's really thinking about how do we avoid that monolithic effort in engaging and working towards our outcomes, especially in uncertain environments. But we think that there's an important set of activities at the outset of your project in avoiding common failure modes, and then really this horribly overlooked process of helping others learn and learning and improving yourself in the process of embedding. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these. The first is in the launch phase, right? So this is when we're just first setting out with our project, moving things forward. It's a simple thing to do, and it's surprisingly overlooked. And I just want to preface this by saying that other project management efforts, this is not to replace the project management systems that you are already using within your organization, but to add a layer of thoughtfulness around crafting for what we call predictable surprise. Crafting for those things that that are within the range of possibility of what could happen within our project, and being mindful of that. So really starting with the powerful why of your project. What's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? And then backing that up to what are the actions that we're undertaking? What do we think we need to do in this? What are the system factors that may come into play? What are the common failure modes that have taken projects like this down before or could take a project like this down? So that's one piece of that, and we ask that you make that very explicit, that you have a method or an approach to document that and share that with your team members. This is not just a thought exercise done in a smoky room somewhere. This is something that gets revisited throughout the project. It's the logic and the initial data sources that underpin this effort. The second piece of this, marshaling resources. I cannot tell you, and you probably have experienced, how many projects go wrong here at this point. You know, thinking about what are we really going to need to sustain this project throughout its course, and what resources do we have available. Lots of people think about this only in terms of budget, but in fact, if we think about the political capital we might need within an organization, the buy-in from stakeholders, the support from a vice president or executive to support that project or shepherd it through, to even link it to other efforts that the organization cares about. These are all critical parts of marshaling resources and building goodwill for your project and overcoming common failure modes. And it may be that if you see a red flag, like there's no way this budget is going to be enough for us to be successful, you call it right at the outset. And you, as a manager or leader, advocate for why that's going to take your project off course and how it will cost the firm more in the long run to risk that failure. And the final part is really about bringing your team together in a way that's meaningful and ultimately bringing the skill sets together. You know, so looking around saying, we know what we're trying to achieve. What do we really need to do that? So it may be that this is your internal team. It may be that you have to hire in certain expertise or borrow expertise from somebody else. But fundamentally, getting the right skill sets are important for the level of analyses that you may need and the success that you ultimately want to have. So this is a big, there are efforts out there that advocate for just do it. Just get straight to that iterative action, the iterative loop in the middle, where we're trying things on, right? We're encouraging you to spend a little time on the front end and really think about the system interactions that can influence the outcomes of your project. So this is a space we all like to play, and I think it's important to think about designing for learning. You're designing for learning, not necessarily success. And so carving off the actions that you can take that will inform and tell you something quickly about your project that you can use in the future is really, really important. It's also important to challenge assumptions. I've worked with teams where they assumed that they were relying on outside feedback from a set of stakeholders. They assumed that those stakeholders would be engaged. That information was critical to the success of the project, and they never participated. And so they got to the end of the project, and the project failed because they didn't get the critical information that they needed because they had made assumptions early on when they could have tested early on. So this is about designing for learning, not necessarily success. This might take the form of a pilot that you might be running within your organization. So you're taking on a level of risk that you can afford. You're not betting the whole farm. You're not putting everything into one basket. You are taking a level of risk that you can afford, and so maybe you pilot something to see how effective it is. But most people design their pilots in such a way that they want to prove success. They want to look successful. But to actually design to disprove something, to test a hypothesis, to actually learn, that's the intent of these smaller efforts. A&B testing is a great example of this for those of you who work in web development or others who might be, I work with it sometimes in philanthropic campaigns. What are the letters that go out to donors that are most successful? Well, you can try different examples on. This is a low-risk tactic. You can try 2 different home pages and see which one gets the most interaction. You can try 2 different letters. You can see which brings in the most money. So ultimately, the other key piece of this is executing on the action while collecting data. Now, we live in a world of big data, but that doesn't mean that all of us have access to it or know how to use it. So we like people to take a very broad look when they think about collecting data. This can be anything from real-time insights from team members and qualitative ways that get documented about what's happening. It can be more traditional forms of data, but make a decision based on the data, not from the gut. And so many times you get data and people ignore that data to make their next decision about what to continue. That may be because we're so invested in the outcomes of the project or wanting that pilot project to be a success, and that's a challenge, right? because it doesn't allow you to let the data do its job to inform the decision that you'll make. And then the idea is, what do you learn from that? What can you try differently as a result? So if you're running that pilot again, what does the data tell you? What are you going to change? How are you going to tweak it or throw it out or move it to make the next version better? And then finally, when we think about embedding, this really embraces some of the traditional efforts we all go towards, to examine our results. But this is a really important time to examine our results against the project outcomes we set out at the beginning, and to use all the sources of data that we have to determine, A, was the project successful in the way that we wanted it to be? What can we take away from that? If it varied from the result, why? What are the lessons from that about that we can pull out and document as to where we think things went off track, or if things worked really well, what were the conditions that enabled it to work really well? Because these are the things that can be pulled out for the future. Another piece of this is, if you use all the data that you have. An example of a technique for doing this is a technique the military uses after action reviews that pull the team together around a series of questions. It's not about judging, it's not about blaming, it's just about taking a hard look at what happened and how that information can be pulled out in actionable ways. So I encourage you to look that mechanism or method up if you haven't used it before, because it's a relatively simple tool that can be pretty effective. The second piece of this is really at the personal level. This is an opportunity to look at yourself as a manager. What did you do well? How could you improve? It's a chance to get feedback from your team members about how you helped with the project, how you handled setbacks, and then to really say, what is it that I'm going to retain in my toolbox as a manager, the things that I want to continue to cultivate. If you successfully gave feedback to somebody, if you advocated within your organization for more resources, if you were able to take a story that was challenging, the failure that you experienced it and help people see the learning in that, all the things that you want to develop in yourself and being really conscious about that. And in the book we talk about a venture capitalist who just rigorously every day journals about the decisions that he made, the investments that he made, and why he made those investments and what he learned through those investments. And then he would return to these journals time and time again as a practice to kind of look at the success of his projects over time and to kind of glean what he wrote about them in real time to apply to that. So there's lots of different ways that this can look like, and it doesn't have to be particularly time-intensive or heavy. And then finally, the piece that just gets overlooked, sharing your discoveries. So how do you syndicate your findings? One way this can look like is how you share team to team, teams that have other similar areas that they might be working in, might be at a different place in their project, and you have information that could be relevant to them. So how do you engage that team, create an opportunity? It might just be joining a staff meeting or a team meeting to talk through that. You might also be able to use mechanisms that exist within your organization, whether that's opportunity to publish something, a white paper, a newsletter, or a blog post within that, whether it's an opportunity to present. Sometimes, companies provide opportunity for teams to kind of present on a project they've been, working on as part of this, and this is a chance to do that. This has to be looked at through the lens of the client. If you're working with an outside-facing client, about what can be shared from the project without violating confidentiality. So this is not like an open invitation to share everything. It's to be really, thoughtful about what is okay to share, to get permission as needed, but also to say what's the most useful and actionable piece of this that people can put to work right away. So it's really challenge everybody out there to think about how they can do this. And make sure that they don't close up their next project without at least sharing some insight from it, whether success or failure, with another part of your organization. So the benefits of doing this, for crafting for mistakes, for testing hypotheses, looking for learning as opposed to success, and at a risk that can be afforded, is that the benefits of doing this over and over is that there's increased discipline in building this into each of your projects, new habits that form, and it becomes easier to build this in and kind of embrace the concept of failing forward, right? So you're moving forward, you're innovating at the front line, and you're taking it at risks that aren't going to, you know, bring the organization down or cause a major public challenge. So I just want to end with some insights around, you know, how do you support intelligent failure within your organization. Ultimately, supporting intelligent failure is about supporting learning. And so one way to do this is really about calibrated challenges. We know that from adult learning, that people who feel too stretched, too challenged, basically withdraw. They fail to engage in the challenge because it makes them so uncomfortable. And if it's too easy for them, something they've already mastered, they're not going to learn or take much away. So we as managers have an opportunity to stretch our team members, to set up a challenge that is just out of the realm of comfort and give them opportunity to try, maybe to fail, but give them opportunity to push themselves. By doing that in a safe way, these calibrated challenges move us forward in taking risks at the right level. The second condition of supporting intelligent failure, also at the realm of the managerial level, is creating enough freedom for our team members to take ownership. So creating opportunities within a project for a team member to design something, to own something, and to actually put their knowledge and skills to the test. So they have some say, some freedom. There's also risk in doing that and not having it prescribed. But at the same time, we give them that freedom and they're invested in the outcome. We provide safety. We let them know that we're not going to scream in your face. You're not necessarily going to be fired, you know, for taking the right risk. You know, that we have a level of compassion, not punishment, if it's a smart failure, and we've taken the effort to define that. Another way that safety is expressed is advocating for your team. If you've taken a risk, you don't hold a team member out to take the fall all by themselves. You advocate for the benefit and the choice that was made. Finally, another way to support this is to provide meaningful feedback. Meaningful feedback to team members and also to receive for yourself is specific. It actually names something. It's not a generalization. Overall, is you were really good at doing this, or we have this, you know, challenge with how this data was run. It's specific. It's timely. It's given enough time to do something about it and have it be relevant to the mistake that was made. And it's consequential. It means that there is a course of action, a way that they can potentially do something different. So providing meaningful feedback is a pathway for improvement in doing things differently the next time. The other piece that I want to talk about in terms of the skills to cultivate is talking about failure. As a manager or leader, it's really important that each of us develop our own examples of failure, our own failure stories. I just know now one of you is going to hold me to sharing my own failure story. But our own examples that we can share with others, that we don't engage in the blame game, of pointing at each other or pointing outside the organization of other factors beyond our control. And that takes real courage, right? It takes nuance. And one of the best ways to be able to talk about failure is to let people know what the expectations are. And I think the spectrum of failure can help. Like, these are the failures that we want to enable, failures at the frontier, experiments, smart experiments based on the knowledge that we have at hand. What we don't want to, you know, failures in effort, failures of following important safety protocols, failures in resources, or, you know, putting together the pieces of the team. These are failures that are avoidable and predictable, and those aren't acceptable, right? So we need to be able to talk about it and share expectations with team members. There's also time horizons, thinking about the right time horizon for a project in which to assess results. Presidents are great examples of this, given their terms. And where this is relevant is to really think about this early on. What are the trade-offs between short and long-term benefits, and when must you see some level of result as an organization? You may need to advocate for more time for your project, but if you don't even think about time horizons, that's how they can jump up and bite you. The other piece of this is escalating commitment. This happens most often in visible long-term projects that are most at risk. This is where you identify with a course of action and you keep investing in it over and over again, long after the data suggests that this is the right course to pursue, right? So escalating commitment, we all do it. We put so much blood, sweat, and tears into something and so much money that we've sunk into it that we just keep going despite what the data is telling us. And the example of the compensation system of the project that I'm working with right now, this is exactly the challenge. For 10 years, so many partners have been so invested in the system working that when it's not, it is so hard to shine the bright light of day on that and to course correct. And I'm excited to be at a place where people are open. The final point that I want to make is about resilience for the journey. You know, the ability to handle adversity. I have ended up in so many presentations and tweet chats and what have you, workshops where people assert that resilience can't be taught or strengthened, and this is false. You can cultivate resilience in powerful ways. And I'd just like to end by pointing to Carol Dweck's work, for those of you who are familiar with her fixed versus growth mindset. Most of us, myself included, struggle with being in a fixed mindset. This is where we believe we have fixed abilities that we can improve, and therefore we showcase ourselves in our best light. We minimize weakness and try to keep it out of sight. So we only do the things we know we will be successful at, and therefore we don't grow. Our own education system supports, with its grading system, a fixed mindset, and it's kind of a travesty. The second piece of this is the growth mindset. You know, to look at stretch as opportunity for growth, as mechanism for learning, the belief that we can change and grow, and embracing a learning orientation. So we say any opportunity or way that I push myself provides an opportunity to grow, and cultivating that in ourselves. So what does this all mean? It means that we have an opportunity for affordable risk-taking and scope for failure. It gives us a platform, regardless of what our company believes, for innovation and experimentation in the scope of our own work. We can work towards building a learning organization by sharing what we learn, and through the process of embracing our own projects, increase professional and team development by paying special attention to our own personal habits that should be retained and those that we should throw out. And this ultimately forms a larger habit of continuous improvement throughout this process. So that's some primary things that I wanted to share. I did really want to encourage people to visit our website at failbetternow.com. There are a lot of thought pieces and helpful tools and examples to support this process. We invested quite a bit in kind of the workbook aspect or checklist aspect of how you really bring this to life in your organization. So I would encourage you to work there or look there for additional support. So thank you, and I know we want to turn it over for questions.
Thank you, Kara. Yeah, so now we're going to open up the session to some questions. If you have not submitted your questions and you would like to, please enter them into the chat box now. And Kara, I actually have a couple questions for you. So question number one, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right, question one, are there best practices or tips for sharing lessons of failure in a risk-averse organization?
So yes, and I think that one of the best places to start is where the organization is, right? So even in the design of project work at the beginning, one of the things we talk about in the book is you don't really want to take on sacred cows right away, or areas that you know are kind of the untouchable parts of the organization, or how the organization delivers services to make your sandbox right away. You want to carve out a piece to demonstrate the value and effectiveness of taking this approach. So, at one level, it's about advocating as a manager, for your team, to support taking some small level risk. And you can do this approach at a very, very tiny level, even for how you run your staff meetings, for example, or your team meetings, experimenting with different approaches to see what's most effective and kind of retaining those practices. And then in terms of actually kind of sharing results up, one of the things we talk about in the book is the importance of being able to craft stories. I think we're hearing more and more about the power of story telling as important ways of communicating information and getting people to respond. So working within your organization to tell the story of learning, to kind of call out the risk that was taken, and the why the risk was taken and what was learned and how that learning can be applied, can really showcase a manager or leader in a wonderful light. I just participated in an interview process just recently where that classic interview question got thrown out to the candidate about, tell us about a failure and how you responded to it. And the person just could not. You know, every time she attempted to tell a story about it, you know, she told something that was very safe, that really demonstrated success ultimately, and she did not get the job. And I think it's because she did not have, you know, she could not demonstrate kind of the resilience and how she'd flipped a real failure to enable learning and a path forward. So I think it's really about kind of being able to craft, you know, and tell the story in a way an organization can hear it and where you can demonstrate the real benefits and impact of that, and to stay away from things that are just untouchable at this point as your first attempt out.
Great, thank you. And then one more question. How do you tell the difference between failures that are learning experiences for the team and failures that should result in firings?
So I think this is building on what I was saying about setting expectations around the spectrum of failure. I think when a manager or leader sits down with their team and says, hey, I want to invite a greater level of experimentation into our work so that we can, you know, so we can innovate and improve. It may mean that we will fail, that there'll be some uncertainty, that there'll be some complexity that we can't anticipate as part of this process. And I want to give us permission to do that. I want to give us permission to take some of those risks in really thoughtful ways. This does not mean we're building a culture, you know, of failure where every failure is okay. And these are the types of failures that aren't okay. And so when we talk about firing, you know, that's kind of organizational and industry, you know, dependent around what the practices there are. But when there's, you know, blatant oversight, intentional deviance from you know, kind of the practices that are put into place and that have been very clearly communicated. I mean, these are places where, you know, this is not an acceptable failure and that must be dealt with through the mechanisms that the organization has. So again, it's not about cultivating a culture of failure, and to be able to do that well, you know, to really cultivate innovation. Instead, we have to be able to talk about failure and distinguish and even role-playing case study examples of what is acceptable and what is not, and give your team opportunity to ask questions.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you participants for your questions, and thank you, Kara, for your insights and for your presentation as well. It was really great. So now what I want to do is introduce Greg DiDonato. He's the Vice President of Field Sales here at EBSCO. Greg is going to be sharing information on tools that can assist you in your learning and your learning development needs. Greg?
Thanks, Jessica, and thank you, Kara. I really appreciate all of your insights. And EBSCO, we love having the opportunity to present authors and experts such as yourself, and that's truly the value that we are bringing to the learning communities, corporations, and the organizations worldwide. EBSCO is the leading provider of informal and on-demand learning content. So whether you want to go wide across hundreds of topics and competencies that would support both multiple departments within your organizations as well as multiple levels of employees within your organization, or if you want to go really deep into a topic such as the one that Kara presented, we have the depth and breadth of content that's going to support multiple modalities of learning, be able to provide a real in-depth view of specific topics, specific competencies that your organization wants to focus in on and you want to drive as a part of your culture within your organization. We do that with 4 or 5 main content types. One of the content types is our business book summary product. Business book summaries is one of the most popular resources that we have within those organizations who have adopted EBSCO as a learning partner. We certainly can provide resources and summaries such as Fail Better. We have over 3,000 summaries that we can offer. It's extremely popular because of the ability to gain the insights from key authors and experts such as Kara to be able to deliver to your organization, especially within a busy workday. We also have a video collection. We're now 800 strong in our video collection. We're delivering the experts in the field to provide the advice on the key topics that we know are relevant to your organization. We want to provide different modalities of learning. We know everybody has a different way that they like to learn, ingest content, and then be able to support their employees or be able to support their organizations. And certainly some folks prefer videos over book summary or like to have a combination of both in order to get the different viewpoints. We also have competency centers. Our competency centers help to provide a framework for key topics such as dealing with failure. It's structured for over 200 competencies to create a bridge or to create a foundation for what you should be learning within this particular competency and topic. We also have ebooks that we are able to deliver. So if you want to get into the complete depth and breadth of any topic, any area, we do have the ability to go cover to cover within an ebook format, again, just so that you have a full understanding of each topic. You have all of the white paper and all of the examples that the authors are trying to portray. Our last piece of content is also our journal content. We have great relationships with publishers such as Harvard Business Review and thousands of other key publishers are going to be able to deliver you the most updated and topics, most updated articles from thought leaders, constantly generate new ideas and discussions. And then to be able to bring it all together, we've developed our Leadership and Management Learning Center, again, driving home all the different content areas that you want to be able to deliver to your organization, dividing them up into the specific topics and competencies that are important, as well as being able to decipher which topics, competencies, and content areas are going to be delivered to the specific departments as well as levels within your organization. So we do have a delivery mechanism for you that's ready to go. So again, we'd like to thank you for attending today. We hope that you'll take advantage of Kara's presentation and her book. We hope you'll also be able to take advantage of EBSCO as a learning partner. We hope to be able to talk with you further after this meeting. So thank you everybody for attending, and we certainly appreciate you all spending the last hour with us.
Great, thank you, Greg. And thank you, Kara, again, and also thank you to you who attended. So please stay on the line. You'll be able to now access a free session takeaway. Thank you again.